this whole series is about this roller coaster ride. Okay, now, I hear all the time, like, I'll hear people talk or give testimony or just people speak about their relationship with God. And to me, a lot of times I walk away going, when I go all in and say, I'm going to be a Jesus follower, I just have this sense from everything I hear about that things should just go smooth then. Like things should go in a pretty, set, rhythm, and that my faith will just continue to grow. Things will get better. My job will get better. People will notice that I'm a Christian. They'll come up to me. They'll like me more. They'll smile more at me. All those things. The police will let me off the hook more often. All the things that like everything's just going to change in your life, and da-da-da-da-da. And then we come forward and we're like, and then we leave, and then it's not happening like they said it would, and I find myself on this roller coaster ride. And I think a lot of us, we relate a lot more to that, to the reality that, when I've said I wanted to be a Jesus follower and go all in, it didn't mean that, I got into, a golf cart and just was on cruise control. What really happened is I felt like I strapped into this roller coaster ride, and it was like, the whole safety thing, how it just kind of like, I haven't been on a roller coaster in a while, but this is what they used to do. It used to come down just like this, and it would lock me in. And I remember going, oh boy, it's about to get crazy. And, and you'd like peek around to the person next to you. Like, are you a puker? Are you a puker? Like, are we good? And you just get in and you're excited, but you know there's going to be some things you like. There's going to be some things that scare you. There's going to be some twists, some turns that you don't really know what's going to happen, but you're trusting that the lawsuit's too much for them to bear, so you're going to be safe. And so you go in, you strap in, and then you're there. And I think so many times in our Christian life, we go into this, we start this roller coaster ride, and the reality is there's turns, there's ups, there's downs, there's smiles, there's frowns, there's all kinds of things that happens in our lives. And the reality is the difference between me saying I'm a Jesus follower on the roller coaster ride and going, I'm going to do it Steve's way and go my own way is, have you ever been with kids or you're that kid when you go to an amusement park and you get off the roller coaster ride and immediately you are bailing around to jump back in line because it was that good? To me, the difference between somebody who's a Jesus follower and who isn't is they go on the same crazy ride, but the Jesus follower gets off and they want to get back on. Because Jesus was with them all the turns, up, all the ups, all the downs, through it all, and they experienced him in a greater way as a result of being on the roller coaster. And the people that get off the roller coaster that didn't have Jesus or not Jesus followers, they go, I am never doing this again. Because none of this promised or fulfilled what I thought it would and what everything else said it would be for me. And I think the other reality is when we go onto this roller coaster ride and say, I'm a Jesus follower, I'm going to get on this roller coaster, the other reality is there are choices that I still make, struggles that I still have, that may create the ride to do a couple dips, to add a couple twists to it. And so, we're going to talk about this in this series. And the guy that we're going to look at is a very, very popular guy, and especially if you grew up in the church. If you grew up in the church, there's no way you don't know who this guy is. Okay, it's impossible. Okay, his name, he's like a Sunday school hero. Okay, David and Goliath. So we're going to look at David. Okay, and we're going to walk through this roller coaster in David's life, and I think there's going to be some things that really we go, wow. And like I said, my goal is that we leave here inspired and changed, but to have a greater understanding of what this is all about. And so in 1 Samuel, verse 16, or chapter 16, verse 1, we pick up. Okay, and in verse 1 it says, Now the Lord said to Samuel, You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel, so fill your flask, not what your kind of flask, with olive oil, and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be king. And then in verse 4 it says, So Samuel did as the Lord instructed. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town came trembling to meet him. "What's wrong?" they asked. "Do you come in peace?" "Yes," Samuel replied. "I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Purify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then Samuel performed the purification rite for Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice too. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him." The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse told his son Abinadab to step forward and walk in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "This is not the one the Lord has chosen." Man, he was so caught up on looks, he didn't even give him a chance. Next, Jesse summoned Shemiah. His name gave that away. But Samuel said, "Neither is this the one the Lord has chosen." In the same way, all 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any of these." Then Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse replied, "but he's out in the fields watching the sheep and goats." "Send for him at once," Samuel said. "We will not sit down to eat until he arrives." So Jesse sent for him. He was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes, like my new baby. And the Lord said, "This is the one. Anoint him." So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Then Samuel returned to Ramah. Okay. To give you some context, Samuel is the religious leader, the prophet of that time. He is the one who speaks truth into the kings, the leaders God has given him. He's that spokesman. God speaks to him. He speaks to people. And what's happened is the current king has done things his way, not God's way, and God's like, "I'm done." We saw that in verse 1. "I'm done with this guy. It's time to move on. I'm going to ask you, Samuel, to anoint the next king," because that was one of Samuel's roles. And so Samuel goes, and he's told to go to this guy named Jesse, who had, as we see, 8 boys, okay, which is like after now having 2, 8, like 8. I mean, that's crazy to me. And so he goes, and I love this because, one of the things about the Bible as you read it, and I always say this, is when you really read it carefully, you notice things that are funny. Okay, so Samuel sees the firstborn, he's like, that's it. All the qualifications, tall, handsome, strong looking. He looks like the perfect role. And God's like, stop. No. We're not looking at that. And then we see, that God is like, none of these guys are it. And so Samuel's like, what's up, Jesse? Like, is this all you have? Like, what's going on? Like, God has not chosen any of them. And then Jesse's like, hey, I've got this youngest one. And it's funny because in the Hebrew, youngest actually means the smallest one. So for some of you who were like, picture David as this like macho big guy, he was actually like this guy. And he goes, well, I've got this young one who's out there with the sheep and the goats and stuff. And Samuel's like, I want him. And then he comes and is anointed in front of all 7 of his brothers in this incredible, powerful moment, I would imagine. And my takeaway from that immediately is this. On the roller coaster ride with God, there is no height restrictions. David didn't make the list. Not only he didn't make the list, but he didn't even make his dad's list. Okay, some of you are dads, and you just are programmed to like your kid. It's like it's in you. Like other people may have every right to be mad at your kid, and you're like, I love my kid, the kid's amazing, oh my goodness, and da-da-da. Like you just love your kid. David doesn't even make his dad's top list. And listen, it wasn't like 2 or like he didn't even make the top 7. Like that's not good. Like if you're looking for this great hero guy to rally behind, he doesn't fit it, okay? Like doesn't fit it at all. To where his family doesn't even believe in him. And here's the thing, like for some of you just need to hear this. God's thoughts of you are so different than what other people's thoughts of you are. And the other thing is you cannot allow other people to dictate or tell you what you can or can't do, what God has called you to do. You can't allow that. Like, listen, there are so many things that I hear, well, I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I'm not spiritual enough, or I'm still new to this, or I haven't read every book. We'll get in line. If we did a poll, 99% of the people haven't read the whole book. Okay, relax. Okay, well, I don't, I haven't been, and someone told me that I don't know this, so I'm not qualified, and all these things, and it's like, man, would you just wash that off and look at who God uses? You make it. You're tall enough to ride the roller coaster. And I remember that, like the really scary rides as a kid, and I'd walk up and I'd be like, trying to figure out, how do I contort my body to be tall enough to ride this ride? Because it looks really fun. And I had an older brother, and as brothers do, he'd be like, oh, this will be a fun ride. Barely make it. Hey, Steve, have fun over there watching me, okay? We all want to be on the ride. God says you are qualified, you fit. And one of the things that I think about this is, when I think of David, and from the Sunday school version of David that I always grew up hearing about and hearing told to me about is I always picture this incredible hero, this guy that was locked in all the time. It says a man after God's own heart, all these things, walked up to Goliath and was like, bam, I know I'm young, I'm small, but I'm going to knock you out. And he does, and all this ninja, with a slingshot and everything else. And I picture David as this incredible character. And the problem with how David was painted to me is like, I'm not like him. I can't be like him. And to be frank, when I hear that he was a harpist, I don't want to be like him. I mean, let's just be frank. I mean, a harpist? Now, if you're into harping, that's cool, but not me. So I always had this mindset of this guy that was like, I just don't measure up. I'm not like that. I couldn't walk up to Goliath and be like, oh, you're going to defy God. Watch what I do. Wah, bam. And all these things. And I just found myself going, man, I can't measure up to this. But then as I started to look and I start to see that one of the things is he didn't even measure up to his own dad. He didn't measure up to everybody else and all this. I started studying who he was. I go, you know what? Man, maybe he's not like who I thought he was. Maybe he is somebody that I can relate to, coming from a small town out in the middle of Washington and this and that and going, man, God, I don't know if you can use me. I don't know if you can use me on this scale, or I don't know if I have this ability, or I don't know if I can do that. But then I study him and I go, man, God, look what you did with this guy. And so we see he's anointed, and then what happens is, because he is a harpist, he actually is a really good harpist apparently, and they were in high demand in those days, I guess. But Saul, the current king, the Holy Spirit had left him, and so he's miserable, and he's experiencing depression, fear, anger, all these things. And so one of his people is like, Saul, you need a harpist to come and harp, because they didn't have iTunes. He didn't have his favorites list, his chill list. All that, didn't have it. The worship list didn't have it. So they had to find a harpist. So they find and they hear about this guy named David, this young dude. And he comes in and he starts playing for Saul. Saul immediately loves how good he is at it. And so David, what he starts doing is playing for the king. And he goes back home. He's a shepherd. Then he comes back, plays for the king. And he starts bouncing back and forth. Nothing spectacular. Nothing amazing. But all throughout this moment in time in history, the Israelites are at war with people called the Philistines. And the Philistines have a guy that we've all heard about to some extent named Goliath, who was their champion, their warrior. And every day he would come out and challenge and taunt the Israelites to war. And they were afraid of him. And it's been 40 days. And so we see that Jesse then talks to David. And he asks David, and he says, David, and Jesse's David's father, he says, David, I want you to go, as any father would. He's concerned about his boys. They're at war. And it's the three oldest. And he says, David, will you go and bring this bread to your brothers? And then also bring these 10 different nice cheeses to the captain, probably trying to bribe the captain to keep him from putting him at the front line, and bring it to the captain. And then I want you to come back and give me a report on how the boys are doing. As any father, any parent would. He's worried. He wants to know. He wants to make sure that his boys are safe. So he sends David to go do this for him. Simple task. And then in 1 Samuel 17:24, it says this: as soon as the Israelite army saw him, Goliath, they began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. David asked the soldiers standing nearby, what will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? And these men gave David the same reply. They said, yes, that is the reward for killing him. But when David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? He demanded. And what about those few sheep you were supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. What have I done now? David replied. I was only asking a question. He walked over to some others and asked them the same question and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him. So David goes in, he sees the battle as any young teenager would do. It's exciting for him, and he goes down to where his brothers are at, and he sees this guy. It's day 41 now, Goliath, huge, massive guy, challenging anybody in Israel and mocking them, mocking their God, everything, and challenging. And David is there, and David says the most spiritual thing he'll ever say. What's the prize for beating him? So what's the prize? Like, what do you get? And he hears what he would get. He hears what? You will get incredible wealth. You will get the king's daughter, who had to be just the stuff, okay? And you won't have to pay taxes again. Okay? That's David's first really deep spiritual question after he sees Goliath. Is he asked that question? Now he's there, and then after he asks that question, his oldest brother comes up, who was like the good-looking one, and he walks up and he says, I know you, you little runt. What are you doing here? Like, you are here only because you wanted to see and be seen at the battle. I know about the pride. I know about the deceit that's in you. And you know what's crazy to me is all these like commentary people, and when you hear this talked about, everybody like harps on Eliab for being this horrible person and defying God's chosen David. Listen, he's his older brother. What do you think happens in the home? Wake up. Okay? And here's the thing you need to understand, all right? Now, I've been very open. Now, me and my older brother were very close now. But growing up was not the case. He detested me, okay? We shared a room for a while. One of the things we're very proactive in right now at this stage is Bronx, who's our newborn. You're in this room. Kingston, you're over here. I remember, okay? Here we go. But we shared a room, and I remember he had to go to bed early and get up early, and I was like, let's be up, let's have fun. And we just clashed. And then listen, he's very good. You know, there's always ones that are very good about getting you to react so that you get in trouble. Like you get caught, but they actually are the reason you did what you did. Yeah, that's older brothers for you. Anyway, and so he would poke fun. He would do all kinds of things to me. And the things that he would accuse me of and say to me about me that hurt, guess what? They were true. They were true. So when he would say, hey, Steve, there's the husky section. Go get your jeans, your special jeans. I wanted to kill him. But guess what? That's the section I had to go to shop for my jeans. I mean, I was like, you're a jerk. He was telling the truth. Listen, brothers don't lie like that. He knows David. And this whole introduction, this whole thought of David, he comes clashing in. He sees Goliath, and he's God's anointed, and he comes in. And the first thing he says is, hey, what's the prize for doing this? And then second, his brother calls him out. The oldest brother calls him out and says, I know you. I know you. I know why you're here. I don't care what you spiritualize. I know what you're doing. And then David, I love this because then we really start seeing, God, David's heart after God's own heart. Because then, David responds, well, what have I done now? And then he walks over, and what does he do? He asks the other guys, hey, yeah, my brother's over there. What's the prize again? Like, no, seriously, I heard a few times. What's the prize? Okay, wealth, fame, king's daughter, who I've seen, and no taxes. Wait, guys, hold on. So what's the reward again? This is David. Like, this is your David that you're just like, oh, I want to teach my kid to be like David. Oh, I want to, Man, David was jacked up. David was jacked up. Like, David was jacked up. And I see this, and listen, what I love about this is not that it like humanizes this guy that I used to like put up here almost like at an idol, but you know what it does? It shows us the issues that this guy struggled with as a teenager. And guess what? Those two things, the two main issues that he's asking about that gets him excited, are the things that end up bringing down his family and end up costing him his being king. His sin with Bathsheba, what was all about lust. And then at the end, him asking his leader to go number the people because I want to see how big my kingdom is. And God's like, you're not my guy anymore. And we see just a glimpse in these little chapters that this is just little David. At this point in time, that's how he is. That's how he's thinking. And I don't know about you, but when I read that, I go, now that's a guy that I would have been hanging out with as a teenager. I mean, yeah, that girl's the poster on the wall. You get her, you get everything else, wealth, notoriety. You never have to pay taxes again. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds cool. And it's just like this amazing thing. And that's it. That's what he's thinking about. And he's like, hey, so wait, what is it again? What's that reward? Can you just spell it out for me? I just want to make sure I understand it. Okay. And then he comes back, and then word gets out about what he's saying to the king. And the thing that hits me is God does not kick you off the roller coaster ride because of your fleshly struggles. God doesn't kick you off the roller coaster ride. Now, listen, does our flesh and the struggles that we have with different sins, does that maybe prolong the ride? Does it maybe cause a few turns and dips that, maybe we were hoping weren't there? Oh, yeah. Yeah, like there's consequences for some of the things that we do and the struggles we have, just as David learns and understands and goes through later on. But God does not kick us off the ride. And some of you feel tonight like God's kicked you off the ride. Or you feel like there's too much in here for God to use in an incredible, powerful way. And the thing that sticks out to me is that nuh-uh. God's not, like God knows, like this is God's chosen person to do something amazing. And we're reading about him being all caught up in what we think is the most spiritual act ever. And he's in it for the girl and for the money and all of that. This little guy. And then Saul is like, he comes to Saul and Saul's like, listen, you're my harpist. You want to fight that? And I'm sure I'm sure Saul looked, okay, so I have two chihuahuas. I'm always very open about it, just in case you ever see me in public and go, that's my pastor? Oh my goodness. Anyway, I look really manly when we go to Dog Beach, and it's just me and them. Okay, but anyway, so I have one who's smaller now actually physically smaller because she's done a 30-day fast, but Gigi is her name. She's small, a little rounder. She was the runt, okay? Now, when a pit bull or a big dog walks up, Gigi starts barking like she could take him. And I always look at her. Sometimes I wish I just had a pocket mirror that I could just go, that's what you look like. Like, do you see what we see and what that other dog sees? Because you are an appetizer to that dog, not even a full course. But obviously then, and sometimes the dog will be kind of annoyed with Gigi, and we'll walk over to Gigi. And all of a sudden, Gigi's barking, but now her backside is locked into my legs. And then she starts like, okay? I'm sure Saul is like, man, David's this little chihuahua. I guess I'll give him a taste, and it's not going to happen, okay? But he says, because he's such a wimp, I'll send this little kid out. I'll send this kid out to fight Goliath because we have no options. It's been over 40 days, okay? No one will take this guy on. We got to put something out there or people are going to start questioning everything. And so he allows David to go confront a guy that's 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Good luck, kid. Okay, for those of you that are mathematically challenged, that's almost the size of a basketball hoop in height. Yeah, like people would dunk on his head. That's how tall he was. Okay, and his armor was about 200 pounds, the armor that he wore. Okay, some of you have worn like, weight vests to train, and it's like 10 pounds, and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm big stuff. Oh, yeah, look at me train. Okay, he had like 200 pounds of armor that he just like walked in, chill. Okay, and his spear was just the tip of his spear, the head was 25 pounds. Some of you are like, 25-pound dumbbell. And that was like the tip of the spear. That was inside of you. If he threw it. That's the type of guy this guy was. And David walks up, and we see this story, and we read it in 1 Samuel 17:40, and we know, obviously, his motives are so good. But then, in verse 40, it says, he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into a shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out towards David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. I don't even know what the Greek means for that, or the Hebrew, whatever. Am I a dog, he roared at David, that you come at me with a stick? And he cursed David by the names of his gods. Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals, Goliath yelled. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. Today, the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then, I don't know what made him say that. Old David showed up. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is huge. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with the sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over, pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Something happens here. Something happens. See, something happens where David starts walking out there and he experiences something. All of a sudden, this guy, this giant, is mocking David's God. Everything that David knows to be holy, pure, righteous, his purpose in life, the anointing that's come upon him from earlier before when he was already anointed king. It was all ordained by God, and he knew everything he had was given to him by God. He knew that every blessing, every opportunity was from God, and here is this guy now defiling God's chosen people and him in particular. And something clicks in David's mind where it's no longer about this hot girl. It's no longer about fame. It's no longer about wealth. It's no longer about being tax exempt for the rest of my life. Now it's about God. And something happens. And I believe in that moment, David's whole roller coaster ride changed. It changed. It was going this way, and then it turned. And I love what he says. The battle is no longer about me and you. The battle is about God, and the battle is God's. See, one of the greatest lessons that you can learn is you're not the point of the roller coaster ride. God is. You're not the point. God is. And to be honest, the moment that you're going to experience the greatest thrill ride you can imagine on this roller coaster ride, as you say, I'm going to be a Jesus follower, the most amazing moment happens when you hand over the security bar to God and go, oh my goodness. Now, don't literally do that because you'll fly off. I mean, you'll be dead, okay? But in this roller coaster ride, the most amazing thing happens when you push that bar out and you just go, I'm God's. It's about you, God. And then we have our Old Testament Rudy story. And then David becomes David again and cuts off his head. I don't know why he felt the need to do that. He went back into old school David, who was about the fame, and he was like, oh, that'll be cool. I can't lift anything else of his, so I bet I could chop off his head. So he grabs his head, and then what David does is spiritual again. He grabs the head, and then David doesn't go home. David doesn't go to Saul. I love what it says in the following verses, and most of you probably never even really notice this, but David takes the head with him, and he goes to the biggest city around, and he dumps it right in the middle and was like, what's up? Mr. Spiritual. But you know what? That's not the point. That's not the point. This is a guy like so many of us. He really is. And what happened for him is what can happen to so many of us. And you know what? It can happen regardless of your motives, regardless of sometimes your mindset and how you feel, what you're thinking about things, your struggles with things. But in the moment, something happens, and God gets a hold of you and takes you and causes you and influences you to do something that you've never felt influenced or even cared about before. And David experiences that moment, and it changes the rest of his roller coaster ride. And for some of you, that moment is right now. And for some of you, you remember this incredible moment for you when, for whatever reason, it may have been someone said something like Goliath was just calling out and saying these things, and all of a sudden it just snaps for David like I'm angry, and it's not because you're yelling at me. I'm angry because of God. I'm afraid, and I'm not afraid because of them. I'm not afraid because of my boss. I'm afraid because of God. I feel this way, and I'm struggling, and I've got all these emotions, and it's because of God. And David has that moment. And what does he do? He barrel charges the biggest dude we ever read about. And it has nothing to do. You see, it was not a fight between David and Goliath. It was Goliath and God. And God wins. And for some of you in your lives, listen, there's moments, there's times, there's mistakes, there's moments where you're in it for the wrong reasons, and God, for whatever reason, because he loves you so much, causes a moment like David has, and you get locked into this incredible ride with him, and you just lose sight of all these fears, all these emotions, these false motives, and you just run after God, and something crazy happens. Something amazing happens. And it's the ride that you end on, and you get back and you go, I got to get on this thing again. I got to get on it again. Listen, the greatest travesty is for you to walk out of here and go, man, I'm going to be a Jesus follower, and then like, whoo, life's awesome. Boss is going to give me a raise on Monday. Boom. My marriage is going to be fixed on Thursday. My kids are going to love me on Friday. That's not the case. I mean, that may be your case. If it is, keep it to yourself, because that's not all of ours. But good for you. It's tough. It's hard. There's so many, and this ride is just, man, it's up and it's this way and it's that way, and it's not how I plan it to be sometimes. And then some of Steve creeps up, and then it becomes about me again, and then God gives me this moment, and I'm like, oh man, and then I get back on. But the key is, I'm not going to get off this roller coaster. You're not going to get me off this roller coaster, because I know what God's called me to do. And David knew from the moment he was anointed what he was called to do. And yes, he had some false motives. Yeah, he had some jacked up stuff like any teenage boy has. But guess what? He didn't get off the roller coaster. And God does something crazy with his life. I want to encourage some of you that maybe have checked off, you've gotten off the ride, and you're kind of walking around, and you're processing it with God. And you're like, I don't know, man. I went through a season where, I was on that roller coaster, and yeah, but man, I'm good right now. I'm good. I want to encourage you to get back in the strap up. And for some of you you're on the ride, you're like, yeah, I'm a Jesus follower, but you're like this. I want to encourage you to just let it go. Let it go. You've got a bunch of junk. Guess what? We all do. We all do. This church was not founded on these perfect people. Ask around. It wasn't. This thing has grown out of brokenness, transparency, authenticity, and just like, this is who I am, and let's just see what God does. And I'm going to get on this ride, and yeah, there's moments where I'm like this, there's moments I'm like that. But man, when I do this, in that moment, when God speaks and directs and he connects something, whether it's conviction or just someone calling out my God, and it just builds something up in me, those moments, that's when the ride stops and I'm like, get me back on, it's time. And I hope that's how you are. I hope you're inspired to be that, to live that, to do that. And embrace the ride. Embrace it. Some of the greatest moments on a roller coaster ride are the ones where there's the greatest amount of fear. But guess what? Right after the most amazing amount of fear is the most amazing amount of thrill. And your hair's back. And you don't have a voice because you've been screaming. But you're just amazed. And it was right after the most difficult, scary part. Hang in there, hang on, and then let go. Get back on the ride, stay on the ride. And let's watch what God does with you. Let me pray for us. God, there's so many self-inflicted wounds in my life because of what I've done. In my own flesh, my own desires. There's so many things that have happened that probably weren't your best for me. There's a lot of turns in my roller coaster ride, my life, Lord, that I created there. But Lord, you have never said I'm too short to ride, and you've never kicked me off the ride. And so, Lord, I pray for some of us that are just kind of insecure tonight, for some of us that feel maybe incapable, maybe some of us that feel defeated, maybe some of us that just kind of go, I don't even know if this is worth it, or I don't know if I can measure up, or I don't know if it's worth measuring up. Lord, I just pray that you would do just what you did with David. You just connected with him in a specific and powerful moment, and in that moment, his motives, his heart, his desires, they became aligned with yours, and he realized it wasn't about him, it's about you. And Lord, every single life in here, it's not about the person. And that's what we do. We get into our routines in our days, and we make it about us. We make it about my career. We make it about my family, my hopes, my dreams. And Lord, for whatever reason, we do that, and then we totally just, disregard the one who's given us breath. The one who gave his one and only son and said, I love you, you're enough. And so, Lord, I pray that you would bring us back to your feet. I pray that you would inspire us to get back in the ride. I pray that you would inspire some of us to let go To stop making the story be about us, because the story is about you. The greatest stories that we read about, the greatest things that we see in our Bible, it doesn't point to a person, it points to an incredible, powerful God. And the Philistines didn't run because of a shrimp with a sword. They ran because of a powerful God. And Lord, the battles right now that are going on in our minds and our hearts and the people's lives in this room, it's not about them, it's about you. And so, Lord, bring us back to you. Give us that moment right now. I pray for that for every single one of us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.